it seems that most of you have heard about the term. Well, actually, I started at number 3. Let's back up to number 1. I would say that the majority of you have a basic understanding of how heavy metal toxicity, what it is, and the potential side effects. And then you looked at, and we asked about, even though there's a fairly even split here, about most of you being already aware, at least many of you having a general idea about the specific genes that can influence how your body detoxifies heavy metals. Most of you have heard the term, or at least have a basic understanding of how chelation works, or what that word is, the process of removing these heavy metals from the body. And I would say that, thankfully, a lot of you want a combination of having professional guidance and self-management when it comes to alleviating a heavy metal burden if you discovered that you do have elevated levels. And finally, we do have overwhelmingly that your motivation, the biggest reason and concern of why you're here is finding safe and effective ways to detox or chelate heavy metals, and especially mercury. So thank you very much. You are in the right place, and we are so glad that you are here. So tonight, I'm also going to give you a little bit of homework. As you watch Lynn's presentation, I really invite you to type your questions in our Q&A box about your genetics, thiol tolerance, or preparation for chelation. Now, obviously, we can't do direct medical, if you type in, oh, I've got all of these genes, I'm not able to assess in that fashion. This really, unfortunately, is not the platform of which I can do that, but we can get some general understanding, or some genes that may be related, or if you have questions and want to dig a little bit deeper, or want some more clarity on some of those genes, that certainly is something that I can answer. And I will be here after the video for those question and answers to help you turn this information into practical next steps. And if for some reason we don't get to all of the questions, or if there's something specific that Lynn really should answer, she will do so within our Facebook community page. And again, that Vandy can drop that in the chat, and please visit, join. A lot of great information. It's not just on heavy metal, mercury toxicity. We cover a wide range of topics, questions and answers that we do keep an eye on, moderate, and answer. So with that, let's start part 2 of New Year, Old Metals with Lynn Angel.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to you all. And some of you attended the last webinar, so you'll recognize my face. But for the new attendees, my name is Lynn Angel. I'm an in-house functional genomic practitioner here at the DNA Company. And this is the second of a series of 3 webinars on the topic of heavy metal toxicity, with a focus on mercury. Tonight, the focus is on the impact of mercury on your health, your happiness, and your vitality. And we're going to identify some genes that play a role in detoxifying mercury, and then also the role of thiols in your diet. I know a lot of you may have been confused because we listed a whole list of foods high in thiol without any explanation. So I'm sorry, we were a little bit too early off the mark there, but we will discuss it in detail tonight. So we are all exposed to a number of heavy metals, but the most dangerous one is mercury. And although I refer to heavy metals throughout the presentation, the focus here is really on mercury. And sadly, I cannot answer any questions in real time because these episodes are recorded, since I'm based in South Africa, and there is a huge time difference between us. So any questions that you have, please share it in the chat box, and I will happily answer it on the Facebook page for you. And I'll also address it at the beginning of our next webinar. Okay, and thank you for the few questions regarding the thiols from the previous And I responded in brief on the Facebook page, so you can go there and read my response to the question. But I'll also obviously discuss it in much greater detail in this session. Okay? So I think we need to start the presentation. So let me just share my screen with you. So new year, old metals, easier detoxing based on your genetics. And before we dive in, just a reminder that the purpose of the webinar is not to diagnose or prescribe a treatment for any specific individual. It should provide information on chronic mercury poisoning from dental amalgams and other sources. So let's start with some physiological damage and symptoms that mercury can cause. And if you are confused of me jumping just straight into these things, please go and have a listen to the previous webinar where we discussed what mercury is, where is it, and how do we get impacted by it? How does it poison us? Okay, so here we have some physiological damage and the symptoms you get. So mercury will impact and cause inflammation and oxidative stress. Frequent symptoms for this would be weight gain, fatigue, and periodontitis. And by the way, periodontitis is a clear clue to mercury toxicity because mercury interrupts the balance of the oral bacteria, which results in inflammation of the delicate tissue around the teeth. And the bacteria in the mouth, because we have really millions of them in the mouth, can methylate elemental mercury into methyl mercury. And this, again, has an adverse effect on your gut microbiome as it alters the integrity of the intestinal lining, so also known as leaky gut. Then it would also impact your adrenal and mitochondrial dysfunction. And frequent symptoms for that would be depression and anxiety. I mentioned now the GI tract, and there, of course, the usual gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn. And I'll add to that that mercury toxic people often have very limited foods they can eat that won't trigger symptoms for them. Mercury will damage the liver, and the liver, of course, metabolizes a lot of things, including sex hormones. Sex hormone imbalances and infertility issues can stem from that. It impacts the brain and the nervous system. So we'll have symptoms like pain or allergies, ADHD, brain fog, skin problems, autoimmune issues, and insomnia. The list goes on and on. So we're going to look at some genetic factors in mercury toxicity and antioxidation. So certain variations, polymorphisms in genes have been associated with an increased susceptibility to heavy metals or a reduced ability to detoxify those metals. And remember, what matters is not so much the SNP, that single nucleotide polymorphism, because we all have a SNP. It is your genotype, the alleles of that SNP that matter. Are you an AA or a GG or an AG? The AAs and the GGs are homozygotes, and the AGs are the heterozygotes. So a SNP is not a mutation. The impact of genetic variations can vary among individuals, and genetic factors are just one aspect of a complex interplay of polymorphisms that have been studied in the context of heavy metal toxicity. You will find these genes in your DNA 360 report under the anti-inflammation section, but it is important to remember that genes do not function in isolation. They interact with other genes in other systems, and so even though I mentioned the anti-inflammation report, some of the genes will also feature in other parts of the report. So we have the glutathione and GPX, which is a mitochondrial superoxidase, the cytochrome P450 genes, and also a zinc transporter gene. So let's run through them in more of a category. So we start with the family of the cytochrome P450 family of genes. They primarily rule detoxification. So they're involved in breaking down substrates, converting it into a toxin. So when your body senses that there are toxins that have come in either through what you've inhaled or that have been absorbed through your skin or what has come in with the food you consume through the mouth, the CYP45 family are sort of the first responders. So they're involved in converting the toxin into an intermediate to render it less toxic. But however, sometimes that protoxin can become more toxic and harmful to the body. And phase one begins the metabolism and detoxification of all foods, drugs, and toxins using enzymes like the P450 enzyme. And toxins like mercury and pesticides damage this enzyme, impairing its function. Then we go on to phase two, the detox enzymes, which is the GST family of genes, the glutathione S transferase genes. They conjugate glutathione to, for example, methylmercury, making it water soluble for excretion via either bile, urine, or feces. So phase two processes the byproducts, those intermediates I mentioned, of phase one pathway. And if phase two doesn't work well, then toxins from phase one will build up in the body, causing oxidative damage and chronic disease. There are basically 6 different processes in phase two where toxins get attached to molecules for either easier excretion. It's a very, very complex pathway, but I'm trying to sort of keep it simple because we need to get to the part of what can we do once we know we have mercury, because your genes you can't change, but we can change the things we do in lifestyle and diet and environmental exposures that can change the way these alleles express. So the 6 processes, and then more or less a percentage of their function, are for glucuronidation. There we go. That's about 50%. It handles steroids, drugs, fungal toxins, and pollutants. And then we have sulfation at about 30%. It metabolizes toxins and drugs, and then the compounds created by your body, like the thyroid hormones and bile acids. Methylation makes up about 15%. It helps your body produce and process body chemicals like neurotransmitters, sex hormones, histamines, homocysteine. It also recycles glutathione. Then it is followed up by glutathione conjugation, which is 20% neutralizing heavy metals and chemicals. Then we have acetylation, about 10%. It targets drugs like aspirin. And then we have amino acid conjugation, which is about 5%, and it binds to toxins like xenobiotics, plastics, pesticides, herbicides, and food preservatives. And these percentages, of course, can shift based on your body's doses. The GST-T and GST-P ones, their relevance in mercury toxicity lies in their influence on how efficiently your body can help to recognize and eliminate mercury and its harmful effects. Let's focus on the GST-T1 for now, mainly focused on the liver area. So at the DNA company, we look at the copy number variation for this gene. And if you have 0 copy, that results in a lack of enzyme activity. So if you have 0 copies here, you have a reduced capacity of around 70% to detoxify mercury. So this would lead to a higher retention of mercury in the body and an increased susceptibility to its toxic effects, and more prone to mercury symptoms, which would be the neurological symptoms because it is a neurotoxin, immune systems, and cognitive impairment. Individuals with 0 copies will experience, and to some degree, the people who have 1 copy as well, fatigue, tiredness, lack of energy, and lack of sufficient recovery. So when you get sick, you take a long time to recover. The GSTP, it's also measured as a copy number. Do you have a copy at all? It works in conjunction with glutathione to neutralize reactive molecules and protect the cells from oxidative stress. Certain polymorphisms in the GSTP gene can decrease the enzyme's activity. This would also then exacerbate mercury toxicity, particularly in the brain and in the nervous system. We also have a rare occurrence here where the heterozygous version AG has actually the worst performing activity, worse than the GG version. These individuals will have chemical sensitivities, migraines, brain fog, headaches, and other neuropathic related incomes. And I think I've made a slip up here. I called GSTP as a copy number variation, and it's my mistake. I'm sorry. The GSTP is either an AG or a GG, which will be the suboptimal versions. only the GST-M, which is more on a gut level, and the GST-T on a liver level, which we measure in do you have a copy at all. And it's also important to know that these genes, they provide instructions of how the glutathione should be used. So if you have 0 copies and you end up supplementing with glutathione, because after all, it's a wonderful antioxidant, you could end up causing more harm to your body. Okay, because we know that glutathione and NAC, for example, have been shown to increase mercury concentration in the kidneys and in the brain. And I know that it's quite the fashion in South Africa, and I'm sure as it is in America, where vitamin IVs are available in so many places, where you can simply stroll in, you can hook up to an IV and receive vitamin C and B, and it's usually a cocktail. And more often than not, you'll find glutathione, because it is an antioxidant, will be included in it. So please be mindful if you know your own genes and you have a 0 copy on a GST-T or GST-M, and possibly even the AG of the GST-P one, be very, very careful with supplementing with mercury. It would be better for you to just support your body with the precursors so it continues to make, because the body makes its own glutathione. Okay, then we move on to the SOD2, superoxide dismutase, that converts superoxide radicals, which are kind of the nasty byproducts that the mercury ramps up, to less full hydrogen peroxide. And GPX, which is a glutathione peroxidase, then steps in using that glutathione to turn the hydrogen peroxide into water and oxygen, stopping the oxidative damage before it harms your DNA or the proteins. So mercury messes this up by binding with selenium on the GPX. So it cripples its activity and then overwhelming the SOD2 function, leading to mitochondrial dysfunction. You will have energy crashes, and on a cellular level, it can even cause cell death. Then we also have our SLC30A8, which is a zinc transporter gene. So this gene exports zinc from the cytosol to the extracellular space to maintain zinc homeostasis. Mercury interrupts this zinc transport through thiol binding, and we're going to discuss thiols next. So it alters the function, causing potential zinc dysregulation, and then, of course, reduced antioxidation protection. Another thing to also remember is that both SOD2 and GPX genes and other defenses rely on zinc for shape and power. And so when mercury competes with the zinc at the transport sites, at the intracellular, the zinc level will then drop. And then there's less grip, if you like, on the free radicals and more oxidative effect from the mercury. Let's zoom out again a little bit. And I want to use the analogy here of the iceberg, because what we see above the water is literally the tip of the iceberg. This would be a third compared to what is under the water of what you don't really see. So for clinicians and health therapists in the audience, knowing your client's DNA blueprint allows you to actually identify high-risk individuals for targeted prevention and support. So being aware that the status of these genes that I mentioned, before I carry on with epigenetics, it can guide personalized detoxification protocols, such as enhancing antioxidant support or preparing their body for chelation therapy, and even adjusting their environmental exposures to minimize mercury accumulation. So it's never a one-size-fits-all, because so many genes and pathways are involved. In our third session, we're going to focus on how to prepare your body for detoxification and for safe, and here's the key thing, for safe chelation, because there are many ways to chelate mercury, and not all of them are safe. And that's why knowing your genetics is so crucially important. I want to remind you all that mercury detoxification, the process of detoxing mercury through chelation, is also mercury retoxification. So please do not start chelating before you've attended our third webinar, which will be sometime in March. Okay. So, right, let's get back to the iceberg. So above the surface is basically your symptoms, the pain that mercury causes. We do tend to moan because we feel awful on so many levels. And I speak from personal experience, as you'll remember from the first webinar. But this is what your client will communicate to you: the fatigue, the brain fog, the migraines, the pain, the insomnia, the gut issues. So you can keep medicating and treating these symptoms, but it'll actually just be a band-aid because we need to deal with the root cause, which is more than often actually mercury toxicity. So our epigenetics, which is your lifestyle choices, your dietary choices, and then the exposures you have to environmental toxins. Like I said, we are always exposed to chemicals and metals. Those can change the expression, those alleles of your genes. In other words, you will get a different experience of them than the original. This is the gene version that you inherited from your mom and your dad. Okay? So a good place to start would be to look under the waterline to the epigenetics, the client's personal history, their habits, their choices, how they sleep, what they eat, how they handle stress, what are they exposed to, and then also a layer down would be the genetics. Okay, so the DNA 360 report can reveal the deficiencies and insufficiencies, and then also the non-negotiables for that person's body. And then you'll see how adding mercury can cause such health chaos for some people. And it's not just the DNA 360. We can also do a number of other tests. Even blood tests can give you an indication of the chaos that's already been caused. So with that, let's move on to the famous styles. What are they? Basically, if you're a clinician on this, don't focus, or even if you are looking after your own health, do not focus on doing any nutrient balancing tests while you are mercury toxic, because mercury, remember, deranges your mineral transport and essential elements, like we discussed in our first webinar. So you cannot trust those levels. It's actually more important to determine whether you need to be on a low thiol diet. So thiols are referred to as mercaptans. They capture mercury, or sulfur groups. So foods high in thiols, and I'll go through, and you know that we gave you a list, but I'll go through just categories in a minute. But foods that are high in thiols and their metabolic precursors are so colloquially referred to as sulfur foods. It can be misleading for some because some forms of sulfur are not thiols and they do not cause the problems that thiols cause. So, for examples would be glucosamine from cartilage or Epsom salts, which is magnesium sulfate. There are many, many lists of sulfur contents of foods available in books and on the internet, but they're not relevant to thiol sensitivity. So please just refer to the list that we made available because that pertains to high thiols and low thiols. So the relationship between thiol intolerance and mercury toxicity. So when you eat a lot of thiol-rich foods, you also circulate a large number of these sulfhydryl compounds that are ready to bind with the mercury at the tissue. And this is where the problems arise, because what you end up doing is that you basically chelate mercury, but in a very weak manner. So you are circulating and redistributing the mercury inside your body. And that will produce a whole lot of symptoms that we already discussed in the first webinar. Mercury can literally ruin your ability to regulate them properly. And people who have thiol levels that are too high will also not tolerate high thiol foods. And those with levels that are low, they actually need to eat plentiful amounts. So I find that approximately 1 to 2/3 of people that are toxic with mercury are sensitive to thiols. And then there's about 1/3 that are low, so they are not impacted by the thiols. So you might need to be on a high thiol diet or a low thiol diet. So healthy foods like superfoods, cruciferous veggies, for example, they're high in thiols, okay? So you can feel pretty miserable eating these healthy foods. So basically, let's go through categories. Cruciferous veggies, what are they? Garlic, onions, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbages, asparagus. The pulses and legumes, beans, peas, dairy products, all dairy, anything that comes from milk is not a food group, but coffee, chocolate, and turmeric is not a high thiol itself, but it's very good at raising thiol levels. And then we also have ingredients that are hiding in products like in bakery goods, which would be whey, cysteine, eggs, and enzymes. Okay. There are also supplements that are high in thiol. So you might be supplementing yourself, not realizing that there is an added ingredient. So always, but always read the labels, please. Okay. You might get a vitamin C. On the front label, it says vitamin C. And you read the back label and they've added alpha-lipoic acid. Read, or there might be glutathione. So these are the ones you need to absolutely avoid once you know you are definitely mercury toxic. How do you know you're mercury toxic? Well, if your mother has had amalgam fillings during her pregnancy with you, you're mercury toxic. If you've ever had amalgam fillings in your own teeth, you are mercury toxic. If you work in a lab or in a dental office where amalgam is being, used still, unfortunately, removed, put in and removed, basically, you are mercury toxic. So these supplements are the ones you need to avoid at all costs because they are not going to make you feel any better. And this is a hard one for people to feel comfortable with. Is it something that they read everywhere is such a good product? Garlic is so good for you. And glutathione is an amazing antioxidant. And so is alpha-lipoic acid and chlorella. How many people are on chlorella because it helps your body detox, but in actual fact, it is making you worse. On the list that you received, you'll see there are about 2 pages that are high thiols and then about 4 pages of low thiols. So if you're going to go into a panic about there's nothing left for me to eat because you happen to eat a lot of the things on the high thiol list, please regard it as an adventure, as a dietary adventure. It's only going to be for about 10 days. That's all. You can survive 10 days. What happens is your body still has a residual level of thiols. So it takes you about 4, 5, 6 days for the body to actually reduce that level of thiols for your body to step up. And you will then, day 5, start to feel fewer symptoms. And some people feel a remarkable difference. I have a lot of clients who wake up on day 5 and they say to me, Lynn, I woke up feeling happy for the first time in many, many years, or I woke up with more energy. So when you are on this thiol exclusion test, so it's not a lifestyle diet. For now, it's just a test for 8 to 10 days. The reason why I say 8 to 10 is that for the first 8 days, you're going to avoid all high thiol foods, and you're going to note the symptoms that disappear. So for example, if you have frequent headaches, take note whether the headaches get less or actually disappear. If you have joint aches or pain, is the pain less or did the pain disappear? And by day 9 and 10, so if you feel better by day 5 or 6, that is a clear sign that you need to be on a low thiol diet, because the high thiols, unfortunately, mercury interferes with them, causing you all these side effects, if you like. If you feel remarkably worse by day 5 or day 6, that may be your sign that your body actually needs, despite being mercury toxic, your body needs the high thiols. But that's a very small percentage of people, I have to say. So then you need to obviously start introducing the high thiols in, because you will immediately feel better. Okay. But for the majority of us, we will start to feel better by day 5 and day 6 and day 7. And then by day 8, you can either start day 8 or rather start with day 9 and 10. So you've given yourself a full 8 days to lower the burden of thiols that you have from your previous dietary choices. On day 9, with every meal, you're going to include items from the high thiol list again. So basically, you're going to start eating the way you did before you started the elimination test. Okay? And here's the key thing. Be mindful and watch for the return of any symptoms that have disappeared in the previous 7, 8 days over the next 24 to 48 hours. So if you wake up the next day, which I must tell you a lot of do, and they feel terrible, the very next day already, the body's responding to it, then obviously there is no need for you to continue eating the high thiols. So you don't need to do another 2 days. You just immediately go back to the low thiols because you have your answer. You will have fewer symptoms and feel so much better on a low thiol diet. Okay? So avoiding high thiols is something that you do while you prepare your body for chelation to move the mercury from your body. Do not be tempted to feel, or to say, I feel so much better. I'm just going to stay on a low thiol diet and I'll be okay. You still have to remove the amalgams if you have amalgams, okay? And let's say, for argument's sake, you felt so much better when you did this thiol exclusion test. You can send me a message via the Facebook group or put a message in the chat box now. And there are some high thiol books that were specifically written for mercury toxic people that will make it so easy for you to start with that cookbook. It's some delicious recipes in there until you get used to, because from personal experience, I remember I was a chef, a professional chef in my previous life until mercury robbed me of that career. And to even consider cooking without onions and garlic was just you've lost your mind. How is it possible to cook without onion and garlic? I also have Italian heritage in me, so it's even double sacrilege because onion and garlic is the beginning of every single recipe. But I can tell you with all confidence that I am now post my chelation journey by 7 years. I still don't cook with onion and garlics. It's the occasional where I will add it. It's not necessary. Your food will taste delicious. So you can still follow your old recipes, but where it says, start with your onions, add the garlic, you're just going to skip that and straight into the rest of the ingredients from whatever recipe you're doing. So it's not the end of the world, people. You can survive. And after a while, remember, the brain takes a while to make a new neural pathway. You won't even know that you don't have high thiols when you prepare your food. On the contrary, you'll actually know when you've eaten a meal that has high thiols in it. Firstly, for me, my first sign is usually a headache. Okay? So, cilantro, coriander. It's often touted as a natural remedy for detoxification, including removing heavy metals like mercury. But its effectiveness as a chelator is very limited, okay, for the following reasons. It has a very weak binding affinity for mercury. So fresh coriander is a high thiol. Coriander seeds is okay. So you can use, if you're curry, you can use coriander seeds. It's the fresh coriander you need to avoid. So it's basically a weak chelator. It's going to pull mercury and recirculate it in your body, causing you lots of symptoms. But there's been no proven mechanism for deep tissue detoxification. Remember, your body stores mercury very, very deep. It hides it away in your fatty tissues to protect you from the impact. It's trying to minimize the chaos that mercury can bring about in your tissues, your cells, tissues, and organ systems. So there's very inconsistent or minimal research support for cilantro as a chelator. Definitely will mobilize it, but it won't get it out of your body, which is why you will feel worse. And then, of course, it has limited bioavailability to the body. I can't command you what you need to do, but I can just tell you to please take at heart what somebody tells you when they've been through that journey. Okay? Cilantro is not a chelator for mercury. Full stop. Period. Done. Okay? We have come to the end. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you again about mercury and how it impacts your health, and how, if you've been to doctor after doctor and you've tried one protocol after another protocol, and while you feel okay and you feel better for a little while, you have a relapse and you just don't feel great. And remember, mercury can impact every single system in your body. Please reach out to us at the DNA Company. Book your DNA 360 test. Book an hour with me to discuss your mercury exposure or your mercury journey, or how to get you to prepare for chelation. We are all here to help you regain your health and vitality. And so with that, I bid you a wonderful day or evening or night ahead of you. And I look forward to seeing you again on our third webinar. And we will make the date available to you, and it'll be sometime in March. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Just again, another wonderful, informative presentation. So thank you so much also, our audience, for putting in some questions. I've been looking them over and I want to dive a little bit deeper into answering them. So our first question is from Gail, and she's asking, how do sex hormone imbalances manifest in today's youth and elderly, etc.? And really, when we're talking about sex hormone imbalance, and I am going to tie in mercury exposure into this, it can really look a little bit different, especially at each stage of life, but there are some common themes. In younger people and teens, it often will show up as irregular or very heavy periods, severe PMS, that premenstrual syndrome, acne, rapid mood swings, anxiety, low mood, weight changes, fatigue, probably sounding a little familiar. In some cases, signs of excess androgens like facial hair called hirsutism or significant cystic acne in girls. Now, when we're talking about older adults, as estrogen or testosterone declines, you more often see low libido, hot flashes, night sweats, sleep disruption, brain fog, mood changes, weight gain around the middle, loss of muscle mass, strength, bone loss, vaginal dryness in women, and even erectile performance issues in men. So now, how does this work or is influenced by mercury toxicity? Well, the thing is that mercury can actually amplify sex hormone imbalances at any age because it stresses several systems that regulate hormones. Lynn spoke into that a little bit, talking about these detoxification pathways because they do affect sex hormone metabolites, the processing and clearance, the breaking down and excretion of them. So first of all, it can disrupt the liver, which is responsible for metabolizing and clearing those estrogen and other hormones. So levels can become too high or too low. It can also increase oxidative stress and inflammation. This affects the ovaries, the testes, the adrenals, and even brain regions that signal hormone production. And having that mercury influence also interferes with the gut, which Lynn was talking about, and the microbiome. This contributes to estrogen recirculation, that inflammatory response, from these metabolites, and it can worsen PMS, heavy periods, mood swings, and weight changes. So in someone already vulnerable, whether by genetics, age, or environment, mercury can make sex hormone related symptoms more intense or harder to treat until that toxic burden is addressed. So something, it really is all connected, and it is something that does need to be recognized first and definitely addressed with a qualified practitioner. Thank you so much for that question, Gail. All right, Lisa has our next question, and she's asking, how much does eating tuna affect mercury levels in the body? She said if you eat, say, 3 times a month, if a person is an active person who sweats a lot, is the high levels of mercury in the body a recent accumulation, or does it come from years of ingesting? Well, tuna definitely can contribute to mercury levels, but how much, it really depends on the type of tuna and your overall intake. So when you're thinking about amounts, for most adults, eating light or skipjack tuna a few times per month, like 3 times a month, is generally within a typical safety guidance, especially if you're choosing, canned light skipjack rather than albacore or big eye, or, those are usually higher in mercury. Although if you look at some of the brands, for example, Safe Catch has a canned tuna that they test their levels and they are actually below the allowed mercury level. So again, and that's even for things like albacore, etc. So, take a look at that. Don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you really like tuna, pay attention to, who you're buying it from. But as far as buildup over time, methylmercury does have a biological half-life of around 50 to 70 days in humans. Excuse me, and can vary widely between people depending on how well they detoxify, genetics included. So when we're talking about, mercury levels, okay, that can reflect both recent intake as well as many months of past intake, not just what you ate last week. When we get into sweating, so being active and sweating is definitely great for health and does help to excrete some metals, but studies suggest sweat is more effective for things like nickel, lead, copper, and arsenic, more so than mercury. Now, mercury excretion in sweat is relatively limited. Remember how Lynn was talking about that it gets more so holds into the fat tissues. So it's not that readily available for, sweat excretion. So if someone has high mercury levels, it's usually from cumulative exposure over time. Again, fish, amalgams, with recent intake layered on top rather than only what they've eaten in the last few weeks, even if they are very active and sweat a lot. So thank you very much for that question, Lisa. All right. So our next question is from Marianne. And she's saying my GPX, the glutathione peroxidase gene, says CC. There's no G or A. And she's wondering, well, what the heck is going on? Well, okay. So we recently did an update in our labs, in our report testing, where all of our genes are now forward read. And in our previous legacy reports done through our other lab, some of those genes, GPX included, had a reverse read. So when you're looking at the CC version, okay, that you are currently seeing, that's a reverse read from our legacy reports. And that just means that your GPX works in a fast manner. That enzymatic reaction happens fast, where TT from our legacy reports was slow. So in this respect, where we talk about A's and G's, the GG version is fast. And this is, again, in our new reports that you will see this is a forward read. The AA is slow. AG would kind of be in the middle, like a moderate speed. So this is something to be aware of. And it's the same thing for SOD2 that also has been updated. So in the old reports, CC is considered fast, TT is considered slow. And our new reports in the forward read, GG is slow, AG is kind of somewhere in the middle. But the main thing is for these two genes that work together in the antioxidation pathway working in the mitochondria is that you really want them working at the same speed. That's really more important than them being fast or slow, that they are working at the same speed. And we also have the catalase gene in our new gene reports. So that's also important when it comes to mitochondrial health. Thank you very much for that. And I hope that cleared up that conundrum for you. All right. So our next question is from Peter. And he's saying when doing detoxification, there's a doctor who he apparently is being in training with or talking about that recommended that there is an order to do so, meaning that in order to do detoxification. And he wanted me to mention about what the order of detoxification is, like mold, heavy metals, parasite, that he was is under the impression that that needs to be done with appropriate binders. And if there is a pause or waiting period between these detoxifying protocols. And I'm going to say stay general here because different clinicians and programs use slightly different sequences. And it's really important that to understand in functional and environmental medicine circles, there's a common order of operations idea, but it isn't the same everywhere. And it always has to be individualized. Remember, our genetics, our lives, our experiences are very personalized, very individualized. So protocols should be as well. Yes, there are some generalities, but we really want to make sure that we understand typical frameworks, but it's not going to be standard across the board. Really, again, looking at more of generalization. What you want to do first and foremost is your foundations and drainage first. Before any focused detox happens, you need to support your bowels. You got to be pooping, okay? You have to support your liver, bile flow, kidneys, lymph, minerals, sleep, and blood sugar so the body can actually move and eliminate what you mobilize. Gentle binders, yes, they can be used even during this state, but you've got to get that foundation secure first. The second thing is to remove or reduce exposures. For example, like getting out of moldy spaces, as that's as important. You really need to stop that inundation, that insult on the body, fixing water damage, cleaning up water, food, air. You need to reduce any new metal or chemical exposure. So maybe cutting down on some of those fish products that you've been eating, looking around where exposure could be. Also, getting those amalgams taken out because that's a constant insult to your body for mercury toxicity. So really, that's where you then go for targeted work. And many clinicians will often start by focusing on mold and mycotoxins in the gut terrain, okay? And that can even include parasites, dysbiosis, but you can't out detox a constant mold exposure and a leaky, inflamed gut. Binders here, it really kind of depends on what the practitioner uses the most, what they like, what they find is most appropriate. So, you work with your practitioner when you're doing a detoxification protocol. Then you move to that heavier duty metal work, especially mercury. But this is a general umbrella because, first of all, you want to make sure that your exposures are reduced, that, the gut and bile flow are better, your adrenals and minerals are supported, and making sure that the person is clinically more stable. Lynn talked about this in part one, the webinar of this series, and she mentioned it again. So at this stage, this is when, more chelators, binders, and we're going to be getting more into that in our part 3 next month, when that can happen. But really, when you're talking about order and how things go, if you're taking glutathione or thiols and things like that earlier on to support, say, a mold toxicity, that you may not find that you're feeling as well because it's transporting that mercury all over. And you're wondering why, well, I'm doing all this, but I still feel like crap. What's going on? Again, this is in that personalized assessment with your practitioner. So it ultimately comes down to stabilize, reduce your exposures, then you start focusing in on what are we going to detox first. Thank you for that question, Peter. It's a great question, and I'm sure one that many people have questions about on what to do, when, and how. All right, so our next question is from Lorna, and she's asking, what about root canals? And root canals, this is interesting because root canals themselves don't usually introduce any heavy metals, okay? But they can be part of an overall toxic or inflammatory load for some people. Really, the whole point of a root canal is it's really designed to save a tooth by removing the nerve and sealing the canals. And in mainstream dentistry, they are considered safe and very common. In biological and functional medicine circles, there's more concern that some root canal treated teeth can actually harbor low-grade infection or bacterial toxins in these microscopic tubules of the tooth, and that can contribute to systemic inflammation, especially in susceptible people. So, this is something that if you think that you may have some issues, you can actually go to a biological dentist. You can have a 3D scan of the mouth to see if you have any cavitations, which are kind of like empty pockets in the bone. And those can just host a lot of infection and bacteria that can cause a whole bunch of problems. So, but again, when we're talking about root canals and mercury, they're not in the same category as far as metal exposure, but they can contribute to a total body burden. All right. Thank you, Lorna, for a wonderful question. All right. And let's see. Brett is asking, he said he doesn't have Facebook to join the group for an answer, but he did all 3 tests, the DNA 360, a total tox test, and a gut 360. And Dr. Tim reviewed with him and put him on glutathione, but he did show mild mercury levels and he's going through a detox protocol with the doctor. Should he stop the glutathione? Well, I'm not your practitioner, so I'm not going to tell you to stop it, to start it, because I don't know your history. I don't know how you are reacting to it. Like Lynn was saying, most people will be negatively affected when taking thiol-containing supplements or food, okay? So one of the things that you could do is you could try not taking it. I mean, talk to your doctor about it first, and have it in a working plan, but you could try the thiol exclusion test for that 8 to 10 days. If you're finding that by day 5, you're feeling better, well, it might be a good idea to not take it right now until that gets cleared. So again, it's something for that personalized detoxification plan that you really need to work with your doctor, with your supervising clinician. So Brett, definitely talk to him and test it out to see what the best choice would be for you. Thank you for that question. All right. So Brett's also saying, okay, I didn't detox yet. My original health issue is with his gut. Okay, but he's got the supplements in his cabinet. Okay, so again, same thing. Work, be open, tell, your doctor about the information that you've heard. You can even watch this video. The replay will be on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. It's also available in our app, The DNA Way. You can look at past webinars, and you can also access it right from our website, looking at webinars. So yes, please, take a look and be informed and work together as a team. All right. Our next question is from Lynn, and she's asking, how effective is molecular hydrogen with detoxing mercury? This I'm not as familiar with for the direct evidence as far as, molecular hydrogen and detoxing mercury, I mean, molecular hydrogen does look promising as a supportive therapy, but it's not a proven primary way to remove mercury from the body. I mean, mechanistically, mercury causes a lot of oxidative stress, and molecular hydrogen has been shown in multiple studies to reduce oxidative damage and to help upregulate antioxidant systems like SOD2 and GPX. So in theory, it may help to protect tissues from some of that downstream damage that mercury causes, but we don't have very strong human evidence yet that molecular hydrogen significantly increases mercury excretion or reliably reduces that mercury burden. So, I mean, you might think about it as a potential additive in your protocol that you can speak to your practitioner with, but definitely not a standalone detoxifier. So thank you for that question. All right. And Grant is asking our next question about what tests determine levels of heavy metals and microplastics. Actually, one of our early questions had commented about the total tox test, and that really takes a look at a full suite of toxins in the system. There's also blood tests, urine tests, a lot of different kinds of tests. It depends on what your practitioner is familiar with about reading and understanding the particular tests that are available or that they actually are familiar with. So that's really something that you can talk to your practitioner about. And if you go to a practitioner who does detoxification protocols, then there are tests that they use and are familiar with. So, kind of work, with them for that. As far as he's also asking about microplastics. Now, granted, that is outside of heavy metals because plastic isn't metals, but there's not much for standardized clinically available blood tests like there are for metals. Now, I'm aware of one. We have no affiliation, and there's still evidence being worked out on this. There's a plastic tox test through Aero Lab Solutions. I mean, it is marketed as the first clinically approved microplastic blood screen. They're stating that they do have peer-reviewed methods. They are in a CLIA COLA certified lab, but we don't yet have large independent data sets that clearly link specific plastic talk numbers to specific health outcomes or widely accepted medical guidelines on how to act on those results. So it's a great potentially useful exposure marker, definitely for a research awareness tool rather than a definitive diagnostic test. So but I'll tell you, a lot of companies coming out with things, but do your due diligence to check to see their robustness and the evidence they have behind it. Thank you, Grant. All right. So our next question is from Dawn. And she's asking, where do you get tested for mercury in your body? What is the most reliable? Hair, blood, urine, saliva? Do you have a good source? Well, we just talked about good sources. I mean, I've actually used like the total tox test. I'm familiar with that one. And there are others that I use too. That one is most inclusive of many toxins. When you're talking about mercury testing, it's really about what question you're asking and what time window you care about. So there isn't one perfect test that covers everything. Really, When we're talking about blood, okay, so a blood test for mercury, that's really best for recent or ongoing exposures, okay, especially from fish or say a recent spill, okay, if you have one of those old mercury thermometers and you've spilled it and have that exposure, yes, that's going to reflect more of that circulating, what's circulating now, not what's stored deep in the tissues. When you're talking about urine, okay, that's often used to look at the excreted mercury, sometimes before or after a chelating agent, like a provoked test, okay, to see how much the body can mobilize. Now, the interpretation can be controversial and should be done with someone experienced in metals. When we're talking about hair, this can give more of a longer term picture of things like methylmercury and mineral patterns, because low mercury in hair does not always mean there's no problem. Sometimes it can suggest poor excretion. Remember what Lynn was talking about in her presentation, that it's not just about, oh, hey, the levels, it's looking low, or say it's a little bit higher, but it's also what is it affecting? Because it truly affects the absorption and bioavailability of nutrients from your food, from your supplements. So it's looking at the larger picture, not just at one marker. When we're talking about saliva, this is mainly used to measure mercury release from dental amalgams, not a total body burden. So, it's really more about exposure from fillings than about how much is stored in the organs. And obviously, nobody wants to have, a biopsy of all of their different organs to test mercury levels. That's just very invasive and pretty painful. And you wouldn't want to necessarily have that. So really the most reliable approach isn't a one specimen type, but really matching the test to the clinical question and then interpreting it in context. So things like exposure history, symptoms, sometimes multiple tests together. So again, working with a well-versed practitioner can be very helpful in that case. So thank you very much, Dawn, for that question. It's a very useful and wonderful question. All right, now for Varus. Can the same detox for mercury also be used for aluminum? Short answer for that, partly, but not entirely. Some foundational strategies do overlap with both mercury and aluminum, like supporting the liver and kidney function, bile flow, antioxidants, minerals, gut health, using certain binders that can help catch metals in the gut. But the chemistry and behavior of mercury and aluminum are different. So, the chelators, protocols that are ideal for mercury, for example, thiol-based chelators that bind strongly to mercury, are not always the best or safest tools for aluminum, and vice versa. Aluminum often responds better to agents that target trivalent metals, okay, and strategies that support silicon, magnesium, and other competitors, which is different. It's a different emphasis than classic mercury-focused protocols. So, yeah, there's a certain level of overlap, but you really need to make sure to reduce that exposure first. So, all right, great question. Let's see. Susan has our next question. And she is asking, she said, I had an oligoscan and tested high in mercury, cadmium, silver, barium, and tin. Aluminum toxicity was at the high excessive level, which is very concerning. I have read about varying detox protocols for aluminum. Can mercury detox protocols? Okay, so she's asking a lot of the same questions as our previous one. Or does she need to approach aluminum differently? So aluminum, she's asking, by the way, she has no idea why it's that high. Okay, if you use aluminum foil on your foods, there's an exposure. If you drink out of aluminum cans, or if you eat out of canned food, aluminum, or anything like that, you're getting exposed. Okay. At least aluminum is a little bit easier to detoxify. Silicon rich water actually is very helpful in detoxing aluminum. There's a book called The Aluminum Man. Dr. Eccles. He's in the UK. He's done a lot of research. He spent his entire academic life and research on aluminum and aluminum detoxification. So you can always take a look at that and see, different, learn more about it. But again, definitely work with a practitioner who's familiar with these types of detoxification protocols. All right. Wow. Boy, they are just questions streaming in. I love it. Okay. So, Cynthia's asking, should I wait to do ultrahuman peptide program? I was advised to do KPV peptide beforehand for possible mold exposure, but thinking I probably have mercury toxicity. Should probably get my 2 old fillings removed first. Okay. First of all, yes, get your amalgam fillings removed. And this is very, very important, okay, because that gets into stop the exposure first. So you're not continually burdening your body. Please go back, if you haven't already, please go back and watch our part 1 of this series, because Lynn beautifully gets into what you should look for in a biological SMART, SMART, certified dentist. So when we're talking about a SMART certified dentist, we are talking about a dentist who is safe mercury amalgam removal technique. And she stepwise goes through what to look for in a biological dentist for amalgam removal. I'm not going to go through all of it right now. You can actually go back and listen, take some notes. And I believe we even have this in our Facebook group for some answers, because it's very important in the process of how they go about removing it, of how it should be done. If you've got several amalgams, they shouldn't be done all at once. Okay, that's one of the things. So a lot of great information. So as far as the ultrahuman peptide program, I'm not familiar with their program, so I can't really speak on that. But a quick and easy way to see if mercury may be a toxic insult on your body. Well, if you have amalgams, apparently, it is. But to see how much it's impacting you, try doing the thiol exclusion test. See if your symptoms are lessened or even disappear by day 5, during this. So that can give you some insight on what to focus on first. And of course, work with a knowledgeable practitioner. Thank you for the wonderful question. All right, so let's see. Michelle is asking, how do you determine by your genes if you can take glutathione or if you should take the precursors? Well, this really works into looking at if you have any null variants. Okay, for example, if you have null variants of the GSTT1 and GSTM1 and are suboptimal in your GSTP1, your ability to use glutathione to bind and move toxins, especially mercury, is reduced. In that situation, taking large doses of glutathione, or even NAC, can sometimes mobilize more mercury than you can safely neutralize or excrete, and may worsen the symptoms. In those cases, many clinicians emphasize precursors and cofactors. So we're talking about glycine, glutamine, cysteine, those 3 amino acids that make up glutathione, from foods if they are tolerated, plus things like selenium, vitamin C, vitamin E, focusing on lowering exposure and supporting the whole antioxidant network rather than pushing high-dose glutathione directly. So take a look at the status of the genes that Lynn presented, then decide with a practitioner who understands these pathways whether your pattern suggests if you will handle direct glutathione well or do better with a gentler, precursor focused or lower dosed strategy. Wonderful question. Thank you so much. All right, our next question is from Tina. Tina's saying, some of my gene expressions have changed in the new report. And actually, I addressed this earlier because she was saying how her GPX went from CT to AG on the new report, and there are several others. Yes, there are, because again, we switched from reverse read. There was a handful of genes that were reverse read that that the previous lab that we used did. Now we have shifted to all forward read genes. So please go in, look at your reports, because it doesn't just tell you the alleles, it tells you whether they are optimal, suboptimal. It gives you more information about that. So please take a look at that. And for heterozygous, that means the two allele letters are different. For the GPX, just by going to CT-AG, didn't change what was going on. It's just the letters have changed, but you still process hydrogen peroxide at a moderate rate. Okay, by the way, you can find these genes in the anti-inflammation report of your reports. All right, and let's see. Linda's saying, my dentist told me that the long-term fillings that I have are not a problem because they are now inert. Is there any truth to this? Well, no. And I'm not trying to be rude, but chemically speaking, amalgam fillings never truly become inert. They're a stable mixture in the tooth, somewhat, but they still contain roughly 50% elemental mercury. And studies show that small amounts of mercury vapor can continue to be released from old fillings, especially with chewing, grinding, heat, corrosion, even EMF exposure, like holding your phone up to your ear. Okay, if it's by a filling, they've actually measured and tested the mercury vapor that escapes from those amalgams. So that doesn't mean every person with old amalgams will become sick from them. You have to look at genetics, total body burden, and other exposures that can make a really big difference. But it isn't accurate to say that they become chemically inactive. That is not true. The more precise statement really would be they're relatively stable materials that continue to release low levels of mercury. And whether that's a problem, that depends on the individual and their overall context. Great question. Thank you so much for bringing that up. And, there are research papers out there that have this evidence. If you want to bring that to your dentist and, kind of educate him a little bit, that's okay too. All right. So our last question is from Lynn. And she's saying, what about bridges with metal base? I have one that is 30 years old and one I paid for precious metals because the dentist said he could, because he couldn't do non-metal. Okay. Bridges with a metal base are very common, first of all, and they're not the same thing as having mercury amalgams in direct contact with the mouth. The alloys that are used in bridges are usually combinations of metals like gold, palladium, platinum, nickel, other base metals, and they are designed to be relatively stable and corrosive resistant. Now, Where we start to pay closer attention is if the bridge is very old or visibly corroded, okay, that should be an indication to look a little deeper. If you have a known metal allergy or sensitivity, especially to nickel, that could be something. Or if you're experiencing symptoms that flare around dental work or when metals are introduced. So, really, I mean, choosing a bridge made with higher grade precious metals generally reduces that risk of corrosion, metal ion release compared with cheaper base metal alloys, which is likely why your dentist recommended that option, which is wonderful. So I wouldn't automatically put, that 30-year-old metal based bridge in the same risk category as mercury fillings. But if you're concerned, it is definitely reasonable to ask a biological dentist or metal aware dentist what exact alloy was used. Have them check the structural integrity and any signs of corrosion on your bridge, and then weigh those risks and benefits of replacement in the context of your overall metal load, symptoms, rather than just by default. So, wonderful question. Again, thank you so much. Everyone, I really appreciate your time, your attention, you being here. I hope you are walking away with more information than when we started. And I highly encourage you, if you haven't already, go back, watch our part 1, and also stick around and pay attention when emails get sent out when we have our part 3. So until then, have a wonderful evening. I wish you all very well, safe, and enjoy the rest of your week. Take care, everyone.